Hey, Larken Rose here. Time for the daily rant. I'm actually going to cover two short, completely unrelated topics in today's rant because two things came up. A bunch of little things come up, and I think, well, that's not really worth a whole 20-minute rant. But here are a couple things that may each be worth 10. Uh, a thing that often comes up when the illegal immigration thing comes up, and a bunch of people who claim they're in favor of freedom and are all for individual rights fall for the trick that says, well, we need to use government violence to keep people outside of the invisible line that goes around the piece of dirt known as the United States. And that there are those Mexicans, those whoever else, they shouldn't be allowed in here without the permission of politicians. Now, of course, those who understand the non-aggression principle understand that, yeah, you have the right to keep somebody off of your own property. You don't have the right to keep somebody off of an entire continent or a gigantic area that you don't own. So the whole concept of national borders and immigration law is necessarily aggression and immoral because it's saying, well, you were born on that side of this invisible line so that we get to use force to keep you on that side of the invisible line unless and until our politicians give you written permission to be over here, which is just bogus, and it's pack mentality and xenophobic and a few other things. And one downside of freedom is you don't get the world to be whatever you want it to be. And people are like, well, what if a bunch of Mexicans come up and then it's like Mexican culture all over the place? Well, then that happens. Like, there isn't some magic right to just have European culture between the Atlantic and the Pacific here. First of all, European culture isn't here. Like, Europeans were the freaking invaders. So to pretend that there's some moral right to, like, the righteous, just, natural thing is for European culture to be all over North America. Okay. How about a different part of Europe? And Spanish culture all over. So you don't just magically get to decide what everyone around you is going to think and do and how they're going to act. But there's that temptation that, if people want a society that they're accustomed to where people are like them and look like them and talk like them and think like them, they want an excuse to make sure that other people don't show up and make it into a different culture. And then they either have to run away or they have to assimilate to a different thing. Because, as much as Western culture and Hollywood is like the vast majority of what shows up in TV and stuff, we're a tiny minority. There's 1 billion Chinese people. There's 1 billion Indian people, as in from India. So we're the minority. Deal with it. We don't magically have some right to keep all the people who aren't like us from coming anywhere near us. So, now, one of the arguments that people use, which requires some muddle-headed excuses, is, well, a bunch of illegal immigrants commit crime, and therefore it's okay to keep them all out. Now, as soon as you get to the principle of non-aggression, you can instantly see the problem with that. Like, wait a minute. If 50%, it isn't nearly this, but if 50% of some group committed some crime, it doesn't mean you get to punish 100% of them. Individuals are responsible for their actions. You don't get to tell someone you're not allowed to step across this invisible line. Even if somebody over here wants you on their property, wants to hire you, wants to trade with you, wants to invite you over for dinner, whatever, you don't get to stop across this line because some other people who are related to you or who look like you committed aggression. That's not moral. That's not okay. That doesn't fly. Now, if a whole bunch of some people commit crimes, you have the right to defend yourself against them and defend other people against them. But you don't have the right to take a whole group and say, we're going to initiate violence against all of you because we think a bunch of you might be criminals. I mean, even if it was 99%, which it obviously isn't, even if 99% of some group are doing something nasty, you don't get to punish the 1% for what they didn't do. And immigration law is all about that, is punishing a category of people for what a bunch of individuals have done, which is just inherently bogus. But when people get into mushy pack mentality and groupthink, then they start to talk as if, well, it's self-defense to keep the Mexicans out because some of them are going to commit crimes. Well, there's no such thing as self-defense against a race or a nation or in anything. There's individuals. Individuals either commit aggression or they don't, and you have the right to defend against the ones who do. You don't have the right to be an aggressor against the ones who didn't, just because they fit into a demographic category, and the percentages don't matter. And I sort of wonder, if someone wants to say, well, a lot of illegal immigrants commit crime, so we're going to forcibly keep them all out. Would they fall for the for the same line of reasoning to say, like, we better lock up all black youths because they commit a disproportionate amount of crime? Or better yet, we better lock up all men because they do the vast majority of violent crime is committed by men. So we better lock up all men, especially between the ages of, 15 and 30, because the vast majority of violence is committed by them. So let's just lock all of them up. Like, you don't get to do that. You don't get to use force against a group because some members of that group do nasty things or might do nasty things. So again, if you just understand the basic principles of non-aggression and self-ownership, you immediately realize, some mother with her kid trying to sneak across from Mexico into the U.S., if you use force by yourself or by way of government to forcibly stop her from stepping across that invisible line, you're the aggressor. You're the bad guy. And the fact that somebody who looks a little bit like her in some other place did some nasty thing has no bearing on the fact that you have no right to threaten force against her because she tried to walk across a line. So, all right. So that's topic number 1. Short and sweet. Topic number 2. Let's talk about the use of violence. Hooray. So many people, this does tie in with the first topic. People think in terms of groups and pack mentality and us versus them. And I've said a million times, the only us versus them I care about is aggressors versus their victims. Races, I don't care about. Religions, I don't care about. Nationalities, I don't care about. None of those divisions I care about. I care who is an individual who chooses to commit aggression and who is the victim of that aggression. That's the only us versus them I care about. And if you're an aggressor over in Iraq and you wear an American flag on your shoulder, you're my enemy just as much as if you're a Muslim terrorist in Syria blowing up innocent children or something. Aggression against innocence makes you my enemy. Defense of the innocent makes you my ally. I don't even care if we speak same language. So now, if that makes you my enemy, it means a hell of a lot of people in government are my enemy because government is all about coercion and control and extortion and violence. And I'm sure all the people who subscribe to these rants already understand that. But I was just having an argument with somebody, and it doesn't come up very often, but it comes up occasionally, where people still get stuck in the groupthink mentality that says government is the enemy. Now, first of all, government is a word that describes a ruling class. Like, it isn't, like, who do you even count as that? Do you count the janitor at the DMV as, like, your arch enemy, or is he just some guy? Yeah, he's getting paid with stolen loot, which isn't great, but he's not attacking anybody. Or the little old lady on Social Security. She's the enemy because she's getting stolen loot. Let's go beat the tar out of her. No, let's not. That would be evil. But so the thing comes up that some people who think the answer to tyranny is revolution, which, by the way, it never ever is. But they broaden their net of who they think is a fair target for quote unquote defensive violence. And I was just having a debate with one bonehead who was basically saying, well, you can use violence against any government employee, including, like, killing them in their own bed as they sleep. This was his example. Even if they didn't personally commit violence, as long as it's part of an overall goal to reduce state violence, which just, that mentality, ironically enough, is the mentality of politicians, is we're allowed to kill innocents because it's for a greater good. It's for a noble purpose, and the ends justify the means, and yada, yada, yada. And I even said to the guy, look, maybe you're dense enough and unprincipled enough to actually believe this, but I know that if I was in power, I would be hiring people to say exactly that, posing as voluntarists. So people think of voluntarists as people who would murder the mailman and the DMV paper pushers in the name of freedom. Because almost everybody will say, well, that's totally freaking evil. And they'd be right. So if you want to make voluntarists look bad, do that. And yeah, you're not a voluntarist if you advocate using violence against an individual to stop a different individual from committing violence, which is essentially what the guy was arguing. Is yeah, if we scare them enough by killing the paper pushers and the guy who delivers the mail and whatever other bureaucrats and little helpers and assistants who aren't actually threatening violence or using violence. Now there are some gray areas that are worth debate, like how far ahead of time is force justified? Like the whole thing of, well, do you wait till the SWAT team is on your front porch? Well, a lot of time you don't have a choice because you don't know about it ahead of time. I would say no. If some SWAT team is in their station ready to get into their vehicle to go drive to somebody's house to kick down his door and kidnap him for possessing a plant, I would say if you happen to know about them shooting them right then before they get in their frickin' SWAT vehicle is perfectly justified. They obviously have the intention of initiating violence to kidnap and cage someone who didn't hurt anybody. So I don't believe you have to wait till the last second, and you can nitpick as much as you possibly want to. Like, okay, there's a carjacker and he's reaching for his gun. Now, his gun isn't pointed at me yet, but he's pulling it out. He ran up to my, he's covering his face. He ran up to my window. I see him drawing a gun. Do I have to wait till the barrel is pointed at my head before I have the right to shoot him? No. He's obviously showing that he intends to initiate violence against me and rob me. And you can say, well, what's the exact millisecond? Like, what about when you see a gun but his hand's not on it yet? And what about when you thought you saw a gun? You can always find that line and say, well, I'm not really sure. That's kind of debatable right there. And it's the same thing with when the aggressor is a government agent. So there are areas which are sort of debatable. But when you just go flying outside of the realm of actually resisting the people who commit aggression and talk about shooting the mailman, it's just, no, you're the aggressor, you're the bad guy. And the only reason people do that is they sort of lump together. They do the groupthink routine, just like illegal aliens do this. Well, no, some of them might do that, and some of them don't. Some of them come over and are perfectly productive and hardworking and decent folk, and you don't get to forcibly keep them off this piece of dirt because some other people who fall in that general category are the same. And same thing with government is they do all receive stolen loot in their paycheck, which is not okay. But the vast majority of people who work for government do not commit aggression. Now, even there's a line that you can argue about, like, well, how direct does their involvement have to be? If they directly collaborate with those who commit aggression against you, the guy who cleans the guns for the SWAT team before they come kick down your door and shoot you, has he committed aggression? I would say no. But somewhere between that and all the way to the guy pointing a gun at you, like, what about the guy who sits in the van and he drives the van? What about him? And people can bicker about that. And again, it's not that there are no areas that are worth debating, but when you suddenly lump every government employee, which is what this guy was saying, every government employee is basically a fair target if attacking them makes the general group known as government not commit as much violence. And that's just not freaking okay. That's the mentality of actual terrorists, that I'm willing to hurt people who aren't committing aggression against me if it will make the people who are committing aggression back off. And that's totally the mentality of actual terrorists and of every politician in the world. Because they always have the mentality that, well, to get compliance, we have to scare a bunch of people and hurt a bunch of people and, the gun control. People with guns might do something bad, so we're going to cage anybody who has one of these things, whether they did anything bad or not. It's the exact same mentality of this guy that, well, if we target this entire category of people, anybody who works for government, as long as the goal is to reduce their violence, then it's necessary. Well, then it's noble and necessary. Then that's, you might as well be Dianne Feinstein and Charles Schumer trying to violently disarm everybody because some of those people with guns might do something bad. So yeah, it's really important to always think in terms of individuals, even when there are 100 individuals. The invasion in Waco, where a bunch of people with guns showed up to invade their house, and the allegation was you own pieces of metal that could be used to make one kind of gun into a different kind of gun. If the people there had shot and killed every frickin' one of those agents, it would have been absolutely justified. And by the way, they could have. In the original shootout with the ATF lost and gave up and put up the white flag and ran out of ammo, and the Davidians let them walk away. And even that's an area for debate, is when they were walking away, would it have been okay to shoot them? I actually think it would have. Like, you came to my house on my property with guns to do an armed invasion of my home. You don't just get to walk away free because you ran out of bullets. But people can debate that, and you're allowed to disagree with me if you feel like it. Again, that ties into the thing of how imminent is the threat. Is they're not going back to quit; they're going back to get more bullets. So, in that case, the point of that example was there were a bunch of people. It's not that the category of people deserve to have use force against them, but a whole lot of individuals, each and every one. You get on a cattle car, you invade someone's home, you pull out a gun, you aim it at their house, you deserve to be shot. And so that was true of every single freaking ATF agent that came off of those trucks. But you can't just start categorizing people. It's always the individual. Whether it's one individual or 100 individuals, an individual should only be punished, or you only have force used against him for what he did or what he is in the process of doing. And it's beyond a slippery slope. It's a freaking cliff. The moment you say, well, it's okay to use violence against some people who aren't actually aggressors because the ends justify it. If overall killing the mailman makes them spy on us less, then it's okay. No, it's not freaking okay. And if that's your mentality, you quickly become the enemy of humanity that voluntarists are trying to fight against, which is someone who, in the name of the common good and justice, will initiate violence against innocents. So that's why it's so important to always, choose actions and choose judgments. Credit or blame should always be on an individual basis. Even if there's a whole freaking war going on, you don't ever say, well, the Germans did this or the military did this. Individuals do things, and individuals can only be targeted for force if those individuals are the actual aggressors. Can only legitimately be targeted. So, yeah, so get out of the group think and the mushy pack mentality and be clear on the principles and the specifics of what's going on, or we just become our enemy, which has only happened 8 zillion times in history, where there's a revolution and then people are like, well, anybody who kind of like that party, let's kill them all. The French Revolution. One group of tyrants oppressing people, and then they get overthrown and people say, let's start whacking the heads off of anybody who kind of liked them a little bit. Well, kind of like them a little bit was not an act of aggression. So, and then it just goes back and forth forever. And it only stops when people are clear enough in their head to understand that only an individual can ever be responsible for his own actions. And force can only be justified when aimed at the individuals responsible for committing aggression. And that's the only way the cycle stops. It's the only way we stop going back and forth from one oppression to another, is when people stop thinking in terms of groups and think in terms of individual action, individual credit or blame, individual consequences.